Good afternoon, Frank.
Hello, Professor.
A lot has happened since we talked last, and as before,
This time, really, a lot has happened.
things seem to get more and more exciting all the time. Before we get into the awful things that have happened, I want to say that I have something that's sort of somewhat optimistic to finish up with.
Okay. Well,
Just to make sure we don't forget at the end, so that we don't finish up on a pessimistic note, because been so much violence since we talked last.
I'll remind
Anyway,
you.
the number of Islamic State-related events in Europe seems to be increasing, and the awareness of it in Europe seems to be increasing. And you probably heard said today, which I thought was particularly interesting, because most people who say anything about it at all are either on the side of Charlie Hebdo, saying je suis Charlie, and they're doing just exactly what everybody should be able to do, even though, of course, you can't do it in England, actually. It's not politically correct.
Uh-huh. But not outlawed.
Not outlawed, but it's not politically correct. So the French are, in fact, what shall we say, more progressive or more something or other than most of the rest of Europe in that regard, in that they have a satirical newspaper that continues to do that. There aren't very many satirical newspapers left anywhere.
No, they're not. They're not.
Because in England we lost Punch, and I don't think there's anything to replace that. And I don't think there's been one in America at all, has there?
Well, there is something called The Onion.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, which is
But
actually quite good, but it's not
I should
seen.
look
It's
at
not
that.
seen frequently.
Yeah. And the only other one I know of was in Iran, which had a superb satirical newspaper in the 60s, and the Shah stopped it in the mid-70s.
Well, I'm pretty sure it hasn't been resurrected since.
And it's not been resurrected since then,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened to Le Canard Enchaîné, which was the original French one, and when Charlie Hebdo started. But anyway, the point is that obviously a lot of people turned out in support of Charlie Hebdo in France, and then there have been these demonstrations on both sides in Germany, and there have been a lot said in the Islamic world against the latest issue of Charlie Hebdo. But then the Pope very cleverly, well, I'm not sure whether it was clever or just he was saying what he thought without having to, so freedom of speech is very important and a basic human right. He said something like, but you can't make fun of faith.
Yes.
And he had somebody standing next to him, and I mean, I just heard it once on the BBC as I was driving in here. He said something about that if somebody said to him something that denied his faith, he might punch you in the face,
Yeah.
even though violence is bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, he has a point. He does have a point. And I think it's been very strange. I mean, these demonstrations have been occurring in the West. It would be far better if the demonstrations had been occurring in Islamic capitals, for example. But that's not going to happen.
No.
And in fact, the only expressions I've seen, aside from the masses in France saying "Je suis Muslim" as well, are Muslims saying that they disagree with Charlie Hebdo. Especially in light of the most recent cover with the 3 million issue run.
Mm-hmm.
So when the Pope says that, it gave reason to pause, because you had to think about it for a second, just even in social context. I mean, if you know people who have a particularly unusual faith, I mean, you might on your way home be talking about with your wife, talking about their fundamentalist Christian tendencies and how odd that is. But you would never say anything to their face, and you would never make fun of them, or even in a satirical freedom of speech kind of ability to do so. You still wouldn't do that. So
So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what the reactions are to what the Pope said.
I think that I think there will be some reaction to it
Yeah.
actually, because I think that I mean, anybody is going to read that or see the film clip or listen to the audio clip, and at some point in the day is going to sit down and think, well, he has a point. So I mean, where does the line stop? I mean,
Uh,
the line between exercising your freedom of speech and criticizing someone's belief in God.
uh, but I think that what is really necessary is something that would be very difficult, and I'm not even sure that it's possible, is for somebody to explain, or for there to be a general awareness of the fact that um, in Christianity, we think that God can look after his own interests and punish the people that he doesn't like. But in Islam, we think that Muslims are supposed to organize society so that everything works properly as God intended it. So there's these two totally different social orientations, and therefore, if each sticks to his own social orientation, or if you like, legal orientation, uh, there's bound to be disagreement.
Well,
And
that's true, and as you well know, because you taught me this, the way Islam is structured is it sets about doing that as a matter of course. It sets up a social infrastructure to do that one thing, to allow for the larger community to worship and to pray. And in a funny way, I mean, that's what Christianity did for its first 12 or 1300 years,
well,
right?
that's because of the political system we had in place at the time,
Well, no, I agree. I agree.
Caesaro-papism.
I agree. But the Christianity then was stopped
Yeah,
and it was sent off in another direction.
yeah,
And the only time Islam has been stopped has been through violent combat, through war. I mean, it's remained pristine, if you will, within itself. There haven't been
yeah,
anybody arising. There's been no Martin Luther, so to speak, in Islam that I'm aware of.
yeah. No, you're right. I mean, the people who didn't do what they were supposed to do in Christianity up until not that long ago finished up like the Jews, if at best,
Yeah,
if
yeah,
they didn't suffer under the Inquisition. Yeah.
right.
So of all the other awful things that have happened, which one should we talk about? The next one that comes to my mind is the very interesting events in Sri Lanka. That the president who thought he was going to be president for life, and everybody else suspected he'd managed to do that, actually got rejected and is put in a position where he has to deny that he ever tried to do anything about it.
Right, right. But he did get a 45-minute private meeting with the Pope.
Yes, yes,
Uh,
I
the,
wonder.
that was scheduled at the last minute.
Uh, I have to say that I don't quite understand the Pope's choice of location, of destination.
You'd think there'd be another refueling stop somewhere between Italy and Manila.
Oh, is he in Manila now?
Yeah, oh, yes. Oh, he's speaking to the largest assembly of people ever put together in the Philippines.
Uh-huh. Well, but
The mass on Sunday in Manila will be just that.
but even so, there's not that many Catholics in Sri Lanka, are there?
Not that I know of.
Yeah.
No, it was. I think it was a sort of a kind of an outreach thing to Buddhism as well, because as you know, he was allowed to see the relics of a Buddhist saint, and did meet quickly with a number of people in a Buddhist temple. He took his shoes off, as is the custom, but the Vatican press release said that contrary to his visit to the Blue Mosque, he did not pray at this temple. He was just quiet and respectful and viewed the remains of the venerated individual.
So I will be watching the magazines to see whether we get an interesting discussion of why, in fact, he went there, because obviously there are more direct ways to fly to the Philippines.
Yes, yes. I mean, he could have gone. I don't know what the statement was they were trying to make.
Um, the other thing that I have on my mind is the future of medicine.
Is this the optimistic thing?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
The I don't know whether how well the Wreath lectures are known by the sort of people who might be interested in what we talk about. But the Wreath lectures, you probably know about them. They've been go on now annually since 1948, and there have been some really quite fascinating series. And I don't know whether they were always 4 half-hour lectures. I think they were longer than that, but that's what they are now. And this year, I think in November or December, early December, they were given by a man with a completely Indian name, but apparently who grew up in America and is professor of medicine at Harvard. And each of his 4 lectures started off with a medical case,
Okay.
which is the sort of thing that ordinary people wouldn't know about. And the first one was a young child, 3-year-old girl, in Austria, not far from Vienna, who in January, a few years ago, walked out without her parents noticing, slipped away from them and walked out onto an a frozen pond. And just as they caught sight of what she was doing, the ice cracked and she fell through. And it took them half an hour, 30 minutes, to find her and to pull her out. And 5 years later, she was completely back to normal. Now, most of us would think that not breathing for 30 minutes and having your lungs full of water would be the end.
Mm-hmm.
But apparently it wasn't. And so each of his talks had cases that were in some way like this, in that they showed the amazing things that medicine has managed to work out how to do in the 20th century, but that we rarely hear of, mainly because most of the attempts to do them go wrong.
Right, right.
And he gave statistics about the number of failed operations in American hospitals. I don't remember the numbers, but they were quite amazing numbers.
In that the number of failed operations is higher than we would think?
Yeah. And his point was that exactly the same thing that I keep arguing, that the 20th century was the century of the individual, and the 21st century has to be, and may possibly be, the century of group awareness and group collaboration. Because he said, to make these things work, all the right specialists have to be in the right place at the right time, ready to do it. And that's very difficult to organize.
That's true. I mean, as you well know, in any gigantic research project aimed at a goal, look at the first one that comes to mind is the Manhattan Project.
Mm-hmm.
You take a couple of hundred scientists and physicists, lock them away in the mountains of New Mexico, and give them a goal and an unlimited budget and say, go to it. And 3 years later, they came up with the solution.
Yeah.
And I have no doubt that if you were able to put together the top 3,000 oncologists in the world and put them at a facility with an unlimited budget, that at the end of that time frame, you'd have some remarkable things. And that's where the interconnectivity, you're correct, is going to begin to become much more pronounced now.
So on the one hand, we've got all this violence, increasing violence going on in the world, which seems to be between larger and larger communities.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's between the West and people who think of themselves as representing the Islamic world, although I don't think they really do. And on the other hand, we've got people talking about the need for greater and greater collaboration and the suggestion that there is greater and greater collaboration actually happening. And what I would suggest is that what we're seeing in the increasing violence is steps towards that outcome, because the violence is between representatives of larger and larger communities, and eventually they'll all merge. But of course, that's an optimistic view, and the opposite could happen, that it could be 1984 rather than the Brave New World, and everything won't all merge, but will finish up being three groups competing with each other for the indefinite future.
I'm inclined to agree with your optimistic view. I think that the new trend, the new capabilities are perhaps, as you often remind us, are not so new after all in the whole scope of history. There have been other huge revolutionary events that have occurred, and it's oftentimes seen that they're used for ill and they're used for good. And ultimately, the ill is not what's remembered generations later, and the good is what carries through. So hopefully we'll see the same this time.
But it's particularly interesting that the Pope should have said what he said today, because the Catholic Church is still the only completely international organization.
Yes.
With,
Yes.
I mean, you can say that there are Muslims in every country in the same way that there are Catholics in every country, or pretty much.
But they don't have a Vatican.
They don't have an organization.
Right. Right.
They have a philosophy of globality, but they don't have an organization.
Well, this Pope is significantly strengthening his organization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and updating it and improving it. Yes, in
Yes.
different ways. Yeah.
Well, Brian, thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
I'll look forward to next week.
Yes, so let's see what's
All
going to
right.
happen in the next 7 days.
Bye bye.
Bye.